don't know if you can say you've ever truly experienced nausea until you are on a high-speed boat rocketing over the waves. The dramatic lift and dip, repeated steadily for over an hour, had me crumpled with my head between my legs. By the end, I was desperate for the trip to be over, and I regretted agreeing to do it. I was on a whale-watching day trip with my aunt and 2 cousins. They too had their heads drooped, and I imagined were praying for this whole thing to be over with. But finally, the boat began to slow, and the woozy passengers trickled out onto the observation deck. A spritz of salt water covered my glasses and stung my nostrils. The surf roared in the background, and I stood for a moment to take it all in. In every direction, there was nothing but blue-green waves with white foamy crests and the dome of a bright blue sky. It was beautiful, it was awe-inspiring, and it was uncanny in a way. There is this experience of suspension that occurs when you are far out to sea. Beneath you are depths that extend for miles. They teem with life that you will never see and secrets that you will never know. And then there is this broad expanse above, and there you are, a speck on a tiny vessel, precariously balanced on the surface. It wasn't long before the surface broke, and an enormous black and white killer whale flung itself out of the depths, and it turned sideways in midair, exposing the grooved surface of its white underbelly. And then with a mighty splash, it vanished. It was the first of many whales that we would see that day. Each of them was magnificent. For the next hour, the boat floated over miles of water, and the horizon stretched out before us, and many whales jumped up from the depths, and I found myself grateful for having risked the adventure. I was so glad to get to see all of this. That was at least until the boat turned around, and we had another hour of turbulent travel back to the shore. From the earliest moments of human history and imagination, humans have dreamt of the sea. It has fascinated and terrified. The ancient Babylonians identified the sea with the goddess Tiamat, who was imagined as a fearsome dragon goddess. And she was thought to embody the principles of disorder and chaos. And this has been a consistent association with the ocean, that it washes away and destroys what humans build. That is the story of Noah, a return of creation back to a watery state of chaos. The sea is a fearsome thing. The theologian Roland Faber writes this: the ocean stands for the uncontrollable, the irrational, the unfathomable, the end of the world in both the spatial and temporal sense, its permanent endangerment from chaos, the monstrous side of the world that humanity cannot escape living with. The sea represents the limits of what we human beings believe we can tame. And despite our efforts to safely navigate the depths, we still run into our limitations. There is the famous wreck of the Titanic. And then nearly a century later, the submersible Titan exploded on its way down, or imploded on its way down to retrieve debris from the Titanic. The ocean continues to represent the limits of what we human beings can seek to control. The ocean, writes Roland Faber, is a prophetic warning against human debris. But the sea is not only chaos and destruction. The Hebrew scriptures suggest that it is also origin and source. Creation emerges from watery depths. The first lines in Genesis speak of God brooding over the face of the deep. And the word here is tehom, which translates as the deep or the abyss. Despite later theologies that say that God created from nothing, created ex nihilo, these lines suggest that God created from vast oceanic depths. These depths contain within them the potential for all that life would become. And perhaps this is why ancient theologies have sometimes associated the sea with the womb. They have spoken of the sea as the source of generation and regeneration. It is the origin point for life itself. These ancient theologies intuit the insights of modern biology, for there was a moment when the first creature emerged out of the depths and crawled onto land. And this creature was not just the ancestor for all of animal life that we witness in the world today, it was also the ancestor for our lives. The process of evolution means that our ancestry traces back to the watery depths of the sea. But this does not mean that we live comfortably on or in the water. Not long ago, I was with a group of ministers, and we were meeting for the day in a basic office building. The bland gray chairs created a sad contrast with the beige walls. And despite the lackluster surroundings, we were glad to be together. The person who was leading this day-long retreat invited us to break into 2 different groups. She then gave each group a list of several items, and we had to imagine being stranded at sea, and we had to prioritize which items we would want to bring along with us. A can of gas, mosquito netting, a mirror, chocolate bars, a plastic tarp. These were just some of the items on the list. Now, I have had very little survival training, so I can assure you that my ranking of these items was not the same ranking that the Coast Guard had. And my team guessed this about me as soon as I suggested that chocolate bars should be the first item on the list. The longer we squabbled over the ranking of the items, the more we began to appreciate the extreme precarity of being stranded at sea. Life suddenly becomes very fragile when it is lost on the waves. It reduces everything to bare survival, to the simple question of whether and how one might make it. The more we talked about it, the more we began to realize the theological significance here. This is something of a metaphor for all of life, for all of our struggles and all of our hopes. Because despite the comforts and safety we assume, we cannot escape the fact that life is precarious. The sea reminds us of that existential condition, the reality of a life that is tossed about by a vastness that far exceeds it. And there are times when our lives can feel especially tossed about by the waves. My friend who has struggled with deep bouts of depression once said that it feels like being stranded on the sea. Grief can feel like that. Remorse can feel like that. We can worry over family and friends and the turmoil that is happening in the world. Our lives can sometimes feel like a tiny boat tossed by the waves. In moments like that, everything gets very narrow, and it can feel especially hard to appreciate the grandeur and the beauty that is a part of life as well. Perhaps this is why I like a particular passage in the Gospels. You might know this one. It's from the Gospel of Mark. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go out over to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. And there were other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was at the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Be quiet, be still." And then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" I think that faith here is larger and deeper than just believing in Jesus or in the teachings of Christianity or anything like that. This isn't faith in terms of believing particular things about a particular religion. It isn't faith in terms of being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. It is having faith in an existential sense. It is faith in the terms that Kierkegaard wrote about, of being suspended over 70,000 fathoms of water and finding the ability to trust, to release our deepest fears, and perhaps even to embrace the moment of life's exquisite particularity and its beauty. It's to trust that the boat won't sink, that the sea won't swallow you. That's what happened to the disciples. They were okay, and their worst fears did not come to pass. And another day was yet to dawn that each of them would see. And I would like to think, perhaps, just maybe, that when their fear subsided, when they got up the courage, when they thought to do it, that maybe, just maybe, one of them stood up in that boat, and then another followed suit, and they looked out beyond the mast, and they saw the cresting waves, and they heard the noisy surf, and they saw the jumping fish, and they smelled that salty air, and for one exquisite moment, perched between depth and expanse, life and death, they looked out and said to themselves this moment, right here, it is so beautiful. It is so worth it.